possible, though, that you don't watch the nightly news, you don't really see a number of these things. But my suggestion to you is that brokenness, that darkness doesn't escape your own life. It might be that you experience dysfunctional relationships in your life. Maybe it's family or friends. People that you hope would have been someone that is loyal but have betrayed you. And you start to wonder, why is this happening? Where is God in all this? I was reading this week, abuse in relationships happens more and more. Domestic violence. 1 in 6 women in Australia face all kinds of abuse. Emotional, physical, sexual. In all this, there is a deep brokenness and darkness. We wonder, where is God in all of this? Or maybe more personally, you feel a deep sense of anxiety. 4 out of every 10 Australians feel unable to cope with life. A sense of hopelessness, maybe a sense of self-loathing. We found ourselves discouraged and disillusioned. See, Isaiah confronts us not with just Israel's history of darkness and difficulty and brokenness of life in this world, but the life that we live in. The life that we look to find a sense of hope and optimism. But see, it's not just that things don't turn out well in this world, that we need to kind of try to find a sense of hope and a solution, but it's a sense of hopelessness that we live with. A sense that sometimes we do find a sense of relief, but it only happens again. I'm not sure if you've been following the conflict in Israel and Palestine, but over the past week or so, there's been kind of a truce, a ceasefire where hostages have been exchanged, a number of good things have been happening. But then I just heard, I think yesterday, the war has begun again, the fighting has begun. There was a sense of hope 3 days ago, but that's been dashed. And so often you see these things, maybe injustices and abuse being unearthed and prosecuted, only for it to happen again. See, if you pay attention enough, you'll see not just the brokenness of this world, but you'll feel a deep sense of hopelessness. That is the darkness that Isaiah is reminding us of. But see, darkness is not just despair and brokenness, but darkness is blindness. This leads us to point B of outlines. Some of you know I wake up pretty early in the morning, so get up at 5 every morning to kind of spend time reading my Bible and praying. And during that time, in the middle of winter, it's pretty dark, though in Sydney it doesn't really get that dark. There are a number of lights that kind of bleed around, and so you can find your way around. But it's different darkness when you go beyond sort of metropolitan Sydney, whether you go camping and you find yourself in the middle of the bush. Darkness there is really dark, and you can't find your way. It's easy to get lost. And so Isaiah is reminding us of this sense of darkness, that as we experience darkness in this world, we don't just experience a sense of despair, but a sense of blindness as well. That each of us experience a deep sense of spiritual blindness. That is, we lack discernment about how to live well in this world. Isaiah reminds us that so often Israel sought foreign gods and they failed to listen to God's word. They found themselves spiritually blind because they placed their hope in where they thought they could find a sense of assurance and comfort, the pagan gods of their time, only to see it didn't make any difference to them. Israel had this inability to see that only God, the God of all creation, could provide a lasting sense of hope and comfort and provision. Sometimes it's really easy to see how Israel failed to turn to God. But I wonder, as we kind of think about the darkness in our lives, whether we see ourselves also spiritually blind. That is, instead of turning to God to be our comfort and our joy and our hope, we find ourselves turning to the things of this world. Maybe we search for a sense of hope to the darkness in our lives, we look within. So often the catch cry of our culture is that if we believe in ourselves enough, that we can achieve anything. And so we look to what we can do in order to be able to respond to disappointment, to difficulty, to discouragement. Or maybe you don't look to yourself, but you look to those around you, your family, your friends, your loved ones. We believe they're our hope to provide a sense of comfort and relief. Or maybe you're someone that looks to what you have, to what you have in the bank account, to what you've built up and amassed over time. You look to the resources that you have as you think about the discouragement of life in this world. It's unlikely that you would say, I put my hope in myself or my friends or my money. But if you think about the way in which you respond to the difficulties of life, the brokenness in this world, is it possible that instead of turning to God, you turn elsewhere? We need real hope, and Isaiah reminds us of that. We need to recognize our need. This leads us to point 2, where we start to realize our hope. Hope is to be found in God in our passage. Verse 1, we see, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the future, God will honor the Galilee of the nations. And then in verse 2, we're reminded that in the deep darkness, a light has dawned. It's this idea that light has shines in the darkness. And God's presence is symbolized by this light coming in to reverse hopeless situations. Do you see there in verse 3 the transformation that happens when God comes? God will act. People won't dwindle but will grow and flourish. People won't starve, but there will be an abundant harvest. They won't be defeated, but instead glorious victory. See, despite the darkness Israel faced, there was hope for the future. They would look to God to reverse the brokenness in which they experienced. Hope in our world is so often tied to a slogan. Do a quick mental trivia game here. Which person had the slogan, "Make America Great Again"? Don't answer. Make America Great Again. What about "Yes, we can"? Do you know that one? Yes, we can. That was Obama in 2008. A better future. Who had a better future? Give you a hint, it's not American. Anthony Albanese, a better future. But so often, if you look at politics, they come up with a fancy slogan that someone has come up with. And the idea is it tries to capture our imagination, that actually a better future can happen. And intrinsically tied to that slogan is that we can do it ourselves. Maybe we can think of a better way to kind of deal with the inequality in our society. Or maybe if we're just more competent in dealing with our money, then those that are more disadvantaged will be taken care of. But in our passage, Israel is reminded that their hope is disconnected from who they are and what they can do, but it's connected to God's presence in this world. Hope is about God intervening. Do you see there in verse 4? For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. If you were here earlier this year, we look in the book of Judges, and we know in the book of Judges there was a man by the name of Gideon who was a leader, a judge of Israel. Midian was a nation that had come in and had started to attack Israel, and God raised up Gideon to lead Israel to victory. But do you remember the story of how Gideon won? He started with an army of 32,000 men, but God said, no, that's too many, and he ultimately whittled them down to an army of 300 people. And then in the end, God uses chaos and confusion to bring about defeat of the Midianite army. See, the victory that Gideon ultimately took credit for was not because of human strength or strategy. It was because God intervened. Their hope was to be in God. And so this is what Israel and we are reminded of in this passage today. Faced with the darkness and discouragement and disillusionment of life in this world, instead of looking within, look to God. Look to the God of all creation to come into your life and make a difference. Leads us to part B of point 2, hope that is enough. God invites you this morning to place your hope in Him, particularly the promises that He has made. See, God promises to bring about a world. There's no more suffering, no more pain, no more evil and injustice. He promises that in Revelation 21. He says God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There will be no death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away in Revelation 21, verse 4. God doesn't just promise a better world. He promises to be with His people, to forgive sin, to draw people to Himself, that we might live in joy and delights of the one that we were created for. It's these promises that we are to cling to. That God is coming to make all things new and to draw us into relationship with Him, that we might be deeply satisfied, that we might find true rest in Him and Him alone. Pause for a moment, though. These are the promises that God invites us to kind of imagine and take hold of. But when you face the darkness of this world, the difficulties of life, where do you turn? I find myself often turning inwards. Often what I find to find a sense of hope and relief when I'm discouraged or disappointed, I think if I can organize the future, if I can better plan about what's going to happen, then I can strategize how to overcome the discouragement of my life. If I can just have a more orderly calendar, then life will turn out better. I turn inwards. I wonder if you do the same thing. It might not be planning to make your future better and more comfortable, but it might be that you do turn inwards instead of towards God. You find a sense of hope and relief in going on holiday or retail therapy. I had a friend once who he told me, like, when he has bad days, he jumps on the internet and starts browsing pens. I'm like, pens? You know, like special pens. And he goes, I make myself feel better by buying a pen. I was like, oh, okay. But retail therapy, maybe that's how you find a sense of comfort against the discouragement of life. Maybe you seek comfort with friends or family, or maybe you bury yourself in a career or social media. You do all kinds of things to kind of escape the darkness of this world. In many ways, you take it upon yourself to find hope. Is that you? But God invites us, instead of trying to medicate ourselves, instead of trying to find hope in the things of this world, to turn to Him. That leads us to point 3, that we might be people that respond to Jesus. See, God is inviting you this morning not to look within, but to look to Him, and ultimately look to the promised child that would come. Look there at verse 6, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given. You might have heard this passage before, but the promise to Israel and to us is that a child would come. A child would rise up and rule a kingdom of peace. And the names that we see there, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, reveal that this child will be God Himself. He'll be raised up as a king that would counsel with wisdom and compassion. A king that would bring peace, not just between humanity, but between humanity and God. And so as we open the pages of Scripture, the New Testament, the Gospels, we see that Jesus is that promised king. He is God's son in the line of David. And He comes, and do you know what He says? He says, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Into the darkness of our lives, Jesus comes in and is present to turn all brokenness into something that might be worth rejoicing over. Think about it. What does light do? Well, we said light helps us see clearly. In darkness, light helps us avoid getting lost. Light helps us navigate to where there is life and civilization, I guess, if we're lost. Jesus says light exposes not just the brokenness of this world, but the brokenness in our own hearts. Our sinfulness that often turns away from God instead of towards Him. Jesus, as light of the world, doesn't just expose us, but He points us to where life can be found in God. But see, He doesn't just point us to where life can be found. He says, I am life itself. See, light brings life, doesn't it? To plants, warmth, energy, brings growth. And so Jesus does this. He brings life. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. As we go to Him, as we trust in Him, He is true hope. He brings us out of the dominion of darkness, of sin and death, brings us in to the kingdom of light. How does He do this? Verse 5 gives us a hint. It's an odd verse. It says, every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. It's this idea that sort of battle victory is not something God will use to bring about His promises. And Jesus will bring life, but it wouldn't be through military power and might. It would actually be through His own death. And so God invites us to take hold of Jesus as our only hope during this time of Christmas, to look to him in the darkness of this world to bring light and life. He's the gracious gift of God to his people, that we might find hope. You might have started a bit of Christmas shopping already, kind of like how Black Friday now, you get some deals, and so you don't have to go with the craziness of the crowds. But interestingly enough, presents always reflect the neediness or the need of the people. Kids need entertainment, so they get all kinds of toys. Dads need fashion sense, so often I get clothes to dress myself, socks in particular. That's the reality, right? But what if you got a book, and the book was how to lose weight and keep it off? What would that person be telling you? Or if you got a book that says how to deal with anger, what would that person be telling you? What does that say about me? I'm just fat and a grumpy person? Potentially. See, Jesus comes as God's gracious gift. But see, the reality is, the only way we can accept it is if we recognize our need of that gift. See, darkness is not just out there in this world where other people do bad things. Darkness is inside of us, in our own hearts that are sinful and distorted, that turn away from God instead of towards him. See, the invitation by God during this Advent season is to look to him, is to cry to him as our only hope and joy. Seek Jesus as your true hope. Two things that you might want to think about as you sort of pause and try to look to Jesus this season. Find hope in Jesus by pursuing stillness. I said to a few people before, December is often very full of last-minute shopping, full of meeting up with friends or family for food, full of last-minute tasks before the office closes, perhaps. It's a very full time of year, very busy. And during this time, it's entirely possible that you arrive at Christmas Day without pausing and thinking about, what are we celebrating? See, if you want to enjoy and experience the hope of Jesus, apart from doing these other many good things, can I encourage you to work ruthlessly hard to find space in your calendar to dwell on Jesus. Create space to orient your heart and look forward to him coming and celebrating his birth, but also to him coming again. That might mean that you spend time reading Advent devotional, a devotional guide that will kind of help you navigate the Christmas story, to help you kind of look and focus on Jesus during this time of year. Or there are a number of Advent calendars out there, something different for every day of December as you work towards Christmas, such that amidst the busyness, part of your heart's direction is to look to Jesus. Fight to find moments to pause and reflect. The other thing about seeking hope, apart from creating time, is to find yourself praying. See, so often as we look or gravitate to the things of this world to be our sense of joy and our hope, prayer challenges us to realize that actually we're limited. We're needy. We need God to act in our lives. And so pausing, not just to read, but pray, challenges us to recognize our neediness and our limitations. It orients us to trust in God and not ourselves. Turn to God. Turn to God this season. Do you remember who Yuri Gagarin was? Yuri Gagarin, you might know that he's a Russian cosmonaut, the first in space, I think. It was reportedly that Yuri, when he got up there, or came back down anyway, he said, "I went up into space, but I didn't encounter God." Would you expect God to be in space if you went up there? Was he really thinking about that? C.S. Lewis wrote this. He says, "If Shakespeare and Hamlet, which was a play that he wrote, could ever meet, it must be Shakespeare's doing. Hamlet could initiate nothing." It's like the character of a book meeting the author of the book. It's kind of impossible, right? You won't find God in space or in the created order. It's not like you go somewhere to meet him. The only way that you might meet him is that he would enter human history and write himself in, like Shakespeare writing himself into a play. The amazing thing that God has done this very same exact thing. He has come into human history, has broken into this world in the person of Jesus, the light of the world, to point us to where life can be found in him. May you find hope in Jesus this season. Let me pray.